Now, in this section, we'll be dealing with the forensic entomology, the study of insects that are craving and feeding on the dead bodies after the first or the second stage have passed. Now, the forensic entomology is the study of the insects. The importance, why is it important to study all of these insects in details? Why do we study their stages of the life cycle? Because they contribute toward the calculations of the post-mortem time intervals for the crime scene investigators. Now, the stages of decomposition, we'll be discussing them in detail, the collection of samples and materials for the study. Now, there is a specific method to collect all of these samples, to collect all of these insects, and how do we study them to calculate the post-mortem time interval. They're a mainstay in a lot of crimes, and so a person who is investigating a crime should have a core knowledge to all of these entomologies. Now, what is the forensic entomology? It is basically the study of the life cycles and the distribution of the insects on the dead body. In what stages they are prevailing on the dead body? What are the environmental conditions of the carcass in which he was placed? And what are the geographical insects which are found in that zone? That should be the core knowledge an entomologist should have when he starts an investigation in detail, particularly to calculate the time interval post-mortemly. So we would be discussing all of these things in detail in this section. Now, commonly, what are the insects which are found on the dead bodies? There can be the blowflies. Moving on, there can be bluebottles. Biological name to the bluebottles is Calliphora. Then there are greenbottles, which are biologically known as Lucilia, and the flesh flies, and lastly, the houseflies. Now, the bodies which are lying openly, mostly they'll be dealing with the blowflies, the bluebottles, and the greenbottles only. And mostly when we are dealing with a dead body, which is inside a house or which is inside a shelter, mostly we'll be dealing with the flesh flies and the houseflies. Another difference which is found in the blue bottles, the green bottles, and the flesh flies and the houseflies on the other hand is that the blue bottles and the blowflies prefer to feed on the fresher bodies. For example, within 12 to 24 hours after the death. And if we find a dead body with larvae and pupas of houseflies and flesh flies, then we should be sure that the body is in some later stages of decomposition. So we have to keep these things in mind when we are dealing with a case of a body which is being parasized by all of these flies. Now, all these flies belong to the group which is known as the sarcoprophagus flies. So we have to keep all these biological names in our mind. Now, what are the carrion insects? The carrion insects are the mainstay to all these entomologies. Why? Because basically they attract all the other parasites and the other insects towards the dead body by start feeding on them. They are the first to start feeding on the dead bodies. They feed on the dead organisms, of course. Then the necrophagous species feed directly on the human corpse. The predators and the parasites, of course, which are a part of that geographical area, attracted to the dead body surface because of the carrion insects. Then the omnivorous insects, they feed both on the dead bodies and on the carrion insects as well. The normal insects already which are present in that area. Now, they can be the hunting spiders, they can be the soil-dwelling organisms, and any entomologist, when he starts investigating any crime scene, he should get a full profile, a full geographical profile of that area. And he should note down the environmental conditions which has been prevailing in that area for the past 1 week or 2 weeks. It would be a mainstay while he's calculating all the post-mortem time intervals. Now, the importance of the forensic entomology. Why do we study the forensic entomology? First of all, the criminal investigations. When we are dealing with any medico-legal case that has happened, we have found a dead body, a lot of insects is feeding on them. We are going to have a core knowledge of these entomologies, of these insects, and then we are going to calculate the post-mortem time intervals to determine at least the minimum time since death. Of course, we cannot be dead sure how much time has been passed on, but we can calculate there can be a range of 4 to 6 hours, plus or minus, when we are calculating the time since death. The conditions and the cause of death. If the person who is dead has been in a debilitating condition, he's suffering from any disease, it basically contributes to the type of insects that feed on him. So the cause of death and the mode of death. Now, what is the cause of death? The cause of death, it can be homicidal, it can be accidental, or it can be suicidal. So we have to basically determine whether it was one of these. And then we have to also notice the mode of death. The modes of death are basically the syncope, coma, and asphyxia. These are basically the three systems involved when we are dealing or when we are emphasizing on the mode of death. Now, the stages of decomposition. We have to basically have a core knowledge what basically stages of decomposition a dead body, a corpse has to pass through before reaching the final stage of skeletalization. The fresher stage. Now, what happens in this stage? Basically, it happens after 12 to 24 hours. The death commences even when bloating is evident and there is a breakdown of the protein and the carbohydrates. This is the stage when the rigor mortis develops. There is a stiffening in the body. The actin and the myosin filaments basically starts breaking down. And this is basically happening within 12 to 24 hours. Now, what is the stage of bloatment? It basically happens between the second day to day 6. The putrefaction begins. There's a bloatment phase. The gas production starts, and the gases produced, they basically inflate the abdomen. The human features are all debilitated. And we don't see a particular picture for the identification of the person. Then there is a decay stage. Now, what happens in this decay stage? Now, there are particular environmental conditions that all come into play. The abdominal wall breaks and the gases escape and the carcass finally deflates. It gets rid of all of the gases. Then there is a post-decay stage. Now, what basically happens here is in a dry habitat, the mummification process comes into play. And what will happen in a wet habitat? In a wet habitat, the adipocere formation starts forming. Now, what is an adipocere? It is basically a shiny, a leathery appearance, and it is quite whitish in color. It starts appearing on the dead body, and it happens mostly in moist conditions if the dead body was placed in a moist environment. And on the other hand, if the dead body is placed in a dry environment and it is taking all of the moisture of the body, then the body becomes quite mummified. It's blackened in color, dried and shriveled. Lastly, we have the dry stage, and it's almost happening. It takes almost 25 or more than 25 days to get to this stage, and the bones and the hair remains. The odor of there's a particular odor to the soil and the litter, and all this dry stage, it can last up to several months or even up to years. We have to keep in mind all of these stages of decomposition when we are calculating the time since death. Now, moving on to the collection of materials for the entomological studies. First of all, what is the type of equipment that is needed by entomologists or the criminal investigators at the crime scene? That is very important. First of all, the hand nets. Now, why do we need the hand nets? We need the hand nets because of when we are collecting these bugs or the beetles, we'll be needing the hand nets. Then the forceps and the digging tools. The forceps and the digging tools are needed for collecting the larvas and the pupas, because of all of these stages are included in the life cycles of these beetles. Then moving on, we'll be needing a thermometer. Now, recording the temperature of the dead body is the mainstay when we are calculating the post-mortem time interval. So that we'd be needing that. Lastly, we'll be needing vials, jars, and plastic bags for collecting of all the evidence at this crime scene. The supporting data needed. First of all, the previous weather for that area. I already told you that an entomologist should have a core knowledge of the geographical area that we are dealing with and the temperature changes that are taking place in that area. So on-site weather data for the last 3 to 5 days, and it can be even taken for 7 days or 10 days. Then the photo and the video of the crime scene. So we'll be needing a digital camera to record the crime scene and to get the intricate details of the crime scene. The clock time of collecting all of this supporting data, as well as the investigations carried out at that place, so that we'd be needing, and we'd be basically correlating all of these factors to calculate the post-mortem time interval of the death that took place at that time. The medico-legal autopsy report. Now, autopsy report is basically written in a very organized way. It basically differs from country to country, and the type of crimes that are more prevalent in an area that are basically included in that medico-legal autopsy report, and we'll be dealing with that in detail. So in this section, basically, we dealt with the entomological studies. The study of entomology is basically the study of the insects that are feeding and craving on the dead body. And why is it important to study all these insects? Because of the calculation of the post-mortem time interval. What are the stages of decomposition and how they correlate with the post-mortem time interval, and the basic equipments and the data required for all of these studies. Do watch the other sections to this lecture. Thank you for watching sqadia.com.